How we doing, coin traders? Thanks for joining me for the show. Looking at Ethereum, ETH, Papa Ethereum, the big L1 that we all follow that does need L2s and now starting to need L3s. But nonetheless, I digress. Always important to keep track of Ethereum and what it does since it is that big name, just like it's important to keep track of Bitcoin as well. So right now, obviously a huge pullback with the rest of the crypto space. Still kind of a decent setup since we had this kind of longer term consolidation before finally breaking those exponential moving averages, breaking daily structure, finding that new lower low, and then now kind of going into this consolidation point. Not necessarily too much cause for concern right now. We know that last time we kind of attempted to break structure, but also lost EMA support on the daily. We actually did find a little bit more consolidation, kicked off this 26 period EMA, had a little bit of this short-term consolidation point before continuing on after reclaiming these exponential moving averages. Now, I think right now we're at the stage where we actually need to see a little bit of a longer-term pullback, so not necessarily thinking we'll see this same type of thing, but overall just kind of want to highlight how just because we do dip below these EMAs, specifically the 50 period EMA, doesn't mean that we're just going to immediately dump and go to lower lows, and obviously this is the high and we're just flushing from here. So do want to point out how we do see recoveries, but obviously it does take some time and it's not an immediate thing unless typically on these pullbacks we can immediately in the following one or two candles recover these levels. Then that's kind of that sign to let us know that that trend is continuing and that kind of just was a fluke in that instance. So right now that's kind of what we're seeing in this instance, especially since we've already had this bearish cross on the 12 and 26 and now starting to get a bearish cross on the 26 and 50 period EMA to get us in a full bearish cross. So to have all these candles still stuck down at this level, obviously confirming that the EMAs are in effect and path of least resistance now is going to be actually to the downside, but that doesn't mean that we're actually going to just continue to see slippage. So we are going to be talking about some of the supports here in the show today. First, though, do want to look at a level of closing resistance to the upside on this daily. We are going to be looking at about 31.55 for the close, so big point of support. Obviously, long lower shadow, not that long, but a bit of a lower shadow below that. And so do have a little bit of a zone, especially because if we do look left, period of resistance here before running up to the current trend high. So if we do, in fact, lead a price level line to the close on those candles, we're looking at 30.19. Now, unfortunately, we didn't actually see that level hold up on the current formation, so not necessarily as reliable for that zone. If we do look to the downside, though, then we do have a relevant level coming in at 29.17. So that is going to be more of a relevant zone, creating this consolidation opportunity for Ethereum right now. And so especially if we look at the EMAs like we talked about, these would actually roll over and kind of end up being resistance. So if we can ultimately end up maintaining support on top of 39.17, then that would be the sign that we could look for to actually start to test this resistance once again and try to break and get back on top of these EMAs as well as this price level. So that's kind of the bullish scenario and setup right now if we do talk about potentials, since obviously we don't think that anything's just going to have an immediate recovery from here. Although nothing is impossible in crypto, we have to look at realistic scenarios. And right now, the rest of the crypto space is not necessarily shaping up in that form. Now, one of the things about Ethereum is that we actually haven't seen as quite the gains that we've seen out of the rest of the crypto space. So even back in the fall when we were looking at kind of our bottoms coming in, even to the current trend high right now, we're looking at 166, almost 167%. So although we actually haven't retraced that much right now, so 25%, which is actually extremely small given the majority of most of the altcoins right now are retraced between 40 to 50 to 60%. So 25% from a current trend high is not much, although be it right now from the low, we're looking at only about 100% gain, which obviously is still a lot in that short amount of time for most assets. But obviously now for crypto, do got to see what is next for Ethereum. So did notice that there's this nice trend line that has been forming. And just like we talked about, not necessarily that crazy of gains, but we do have nice steady gains, especially after, like we talked about, when we did actually break through these EMAs, still found very nice support on this trend line before actually rallying up, back testing this trend line once again. And that is then once we broke our EMAs and ended up confirming this trend line as support. So not crazy to think that even if we do end up sitting sideways, we could actually revisit this trend line or even potentially breaking through the 29.17 level as well, revisiting this trend line once again. The next level of technical price support would actually be coming in at 28.34, so that could potentially be a level that we end up seeing be a test for both price level as well as trend. And then in that instance as well, I would expect EMAs to start rolling over to catch up to that point. So we could have a nice bounce if we do get down to that level. But also, I think that a lot of other cryptos are starting to bottom, which probably does still include Ethereum as well. So not to say that we can't see prices any lower than this, but like we said, we do have plenty of downside supports that we could think are going to end up holding up for the longer term before rallying up to test this 31.55 resistance point once again. All right, now flipping over into the weekly, very, very, very good setup right now on the weekly. And the thing that makes me say that is that we actually saw our low coming in at a low of 879 back on the 13th of June, 2022 candle. Ever since then, actually made higher lows. So we ran up, set another higher low back in the fall. And even keep in mind that even after the FTX crash, we still maintained a higher low compared to what we actually saw coming off of the all-time high here back in early November 2021. That also is when we didn't even see the mass amount of selling pressure coming in. So even when we did see the biggest amount of sell volume, we still didn't even end up setting a new lower low on this weekly trend. So still good long-term pattern that has been intact since 2022. So we're looking at almost a 2-year trend where we were ultimately forming higher highs and higher lows. So now we are starting to get a little bit more growth coming in, especially after this period of accumulation, where a lot of the rest of the altcoins were kind of more or less flat if you look at the charts, just because the pullback was so significant. So pulling back from the all-time high, even down to the low, 81%, and then even down to the most recent lows for the fall before our rally, 68%. And now on this run-up right now, very nice rally, back-tested the EMA support after it flipped bullish, but we didn't necessarily get a retracement for that. We more or less sat sideways until the EMA caught up, had multiple attempts of this 12-period exponential moving average, and then finally had another big explosive move before a very normal and healthy retracement and pullback. So even pulling up Fibonacci's right now from the low to this current trend high, we're not even at the 50% retracement yet. So we did dip below the 38.2, which is totally fine and normal, because keep in mind this also is from the trend low, which was down at 1520.85. Now, seeing this kind of a pattern, especially when we talk about EMA support, is very good because, like we said, typically we do find EMA support. It did break, but now we're actually looking towards 26-period EMA support. So on the current candle for that, we're actually looking at 2784.92. Which doesn't necessarily correlate to anything if we do look left, but if we do drop down to the 50-period EMA, then that's pretty much going to be right at the point that we actually have our previous resistance as well as support. So currently on this move, big resistance before actually breaking through it. So that's confirmed as closing resistance for that weekly at 24.80. And then even looking left, big extreme point of support as well before this little mini bounce and then flushing down to our current trend low for the bear market. So we do have plenty of supports to the downside, and this weekly structure is still extremely good because, like we said, we haven't even had tests of the 26 or the 50 yet. And meanwhile, a lot of other names are actually breaking below that. So weekly structure for Ethereum still very nice, especially maintaining support on top of a lot of these previous resistances. Looking left, if we actually want to look at the heart line for a lot of this crazy price trading action, that's pretty much right where we are coming in right now, around the $3,000 mark. Unfortunately, if we turn on the VPVR volume profile visible range, doesn't really show this too much because most of the volume was below it. But you can see how we did have a lot of volume just overall in this range. And as we do start to slip to the downside, we are getting a little bit of increasing volume. So we know that support is going to keep increasing as prices do continue to come down, if in fact they ultimately do, especially being able to break the $3,000 support. Now, turning on some technicals for this weekly chart for Ethereum, we're extremely overbought for this weekly chart, but if you notice on the initial run-up, we actually weren't seeing that. So higher highs in price, higher highs in RSI as well. Very, very healthy movement, but right now we know that especially coming in with the weekly close at 84.22, we did have to have a retracement, which right now we're actually seeing a lower RSI on the current weekly candle. Now, it hasn't closed yet, so ultimately we could see this RSI actually pick back up, maintaining RSI support. But right now we are looking at a little bit lower of an RSI level compared to what we saw prior to kicking off this 12-period EMA and setting our current trend high right now for that at 409388. Looking down at the stochastic RSI, pretty good level, returning to below the 20 line here pretty soon. So still have a little bit of downside momentum, and then likely we would expect a little bit of a bullish cross, kind of like we did experience back in the fall, before leading to this initial first rally here. So on this weekly, when we have seen stochastic RSI get below the 20 line, we typically know that that is a very good sign that we're going to see a bullish cross and then a little bit more upside momentum based on what has happened historically. Now, historically, we also know that after huge run-ups, we do need periods of chop and sideways action after these big legs to the upside. So we're expecting kind of more or less some chop happen, kind of like we've had previously. So even big run-ups, more or less some sideways consolidation before continuation, big run-ups and a big pullback continuation after kicking off these EMAs. Very possible scenario of what we could be looking at. So that is to be expected right now. How probably not necessarily that much of an immediate bounce to be playing out, but more or less we do know that that is the kind of pattern that we do look with Ethereum, since we do have spikes, and then ultimately end up being pretty big retracements from those. So even on the consolidation and kickback coming off of the lows, still saw kind of the same sort of thing. So we know that right now, after such big moves to the upside, we're not necessarily going to expect the next leg immediately. Probably it will take a few weeks at least, which is kind of in line with what we've been expecting and talking about for the rest of the crypto and altcoin space as well. Now, this wouldn't be a complete analysis without some touching on the Ethereum Bitcoin pairing chart, because obviously this is extremely relevant with the top two names right now, and Bitcoin still has been taking the lead and has been increasing in dominance. So just want to talk about this chart here for a little bit. We have been making lower highs, obviously, since Ethereum did put in its current all-time high right now back in November of 2021. And ever since, they're kind of more or less just have been pulling back overall, as we have seen Bitcoin being the leading and stronger name in dominance. So ultimately, we do need to expect Ethereum to be finding some support and actually starting to change this trend here, because that would lead the way for a lot of altcoins, especially in the upcoming altcoin cycle. And typically when we do get those kind of situations, that's pretty much what we saw on the last cycle, where we saw higher highs and higher lows in this pairing chart. Ultimately, a huge spike as we did get altcoins to run up, while Bitcoin kind of more or less stayed stagnant and pulled back. Very normal for the cycle, and then obviously huge sideways chop action before starting to pull back. And then right now we are running to the downside on these exponential moving averages, starting to get more increasing bearish volume, so not the best sign on this as well. So do need to see some bulls put in some volume, actually establish higher lows, break the trends, break through these EMAs, and then that is really what's going to start kicking off our bull cycle, kind of like what we experienced after this big long downtrend on the last cycle. So still kind of a normal pattern for where we're at right now based on these charts, but more or less, yeah, we are starting to expect that we will be finding a bottom here hopefully soon, and that a lot of money will be flowing into altcoins once again. Obviously, right now with the ETF hype and excitement, and especially the upcoming halving, we have seen Bitcoin start to take the hype and spotlight a lot more. But ultimately know that a lot of benefit and gain will be thrown into altcoins, specifically a lot of the smart contract platforms as well, just because a lot of hype, meme coins, things like that do happened on those. And yeah, we start to see things like an NFT boom and whatnot. So ultimately, do think that we still have probably a little bit of pullback on this Ethereum Bitcoin pairing chart, but ultimately we will be finding a low. Can't really go too much lower, especially since right now we are kicking off of the previous level of resistance here at 4629 Satoshis. So hopefully can still maintain that, since it was previous resistance, and now hold it as support before being able to hopefully continue to consolidate sideways and then find our bullish breakout to the upside, as we do start to continue anyway a longer trend for this upcoming cycle here. But yeah, otherwise that actually is going to go ahead and wrap it up for Ethereum. Still very nice chart here, and still the ability to maintain hype and a very nice uptrend here, because we are still looking extremely nice and haven't broken any sort of structures just yet. But yeah, otherwise make sure you do post your questions, comments, issues, disagreements, all that down below in the comments section. Do love getting back to each and every one of you. And don't forget to drop me a follow over on Twitter or X at @coin_trades is the handle over there. Well, do appreciate all the continued love and support as always as well. It does mean so much. Stay safe, take care, everyone. I'll catch you back in the next video.